Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is um let's see here. Welcome back, everyone. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos, and today I want to talk to you guys about the Logos and the Dao. And so we're going to be going into Hieromonk Damascene's very popular book, Christ the Eternal Tao. But before that, I want to give a sort of overview, a discussion on what exactly the Dao is, what exactly the Logos is, and kind of a brief overview of kind of this book, the Jesus Sutras, and the Nestorian Church of the East and its entrance into the Tang dynasty and their dominion over the Chinese Empire, and how maybe, just maybe, Christianity took on a very unique and interesting place within the Tang dynasty, the religion of light, if you will. So these are some of the things that I want to get into today. We're going to be, again, really focused on the Chinese naturalistic, spiritual, philosophical tradition called Taoism. And we're going to be looking at how the Tao is a sort of pre-Christian, natural theological understanding of the Logos. And what I mean by that is obviously our tradition is going to be rooted in revelation. Whereas when we look at Taoism, when we look at this naturalistic spiritual philosophy and its emergence, it's going to be rooted in the observation of nature itself. So being rooted in the observation of nature, it's, again, sort of natural theology, if you will. And so just wanted to highlight that. So let's see here. If you guys can, please smash that like as you guys come in. Smash that like. It looks like a lot of people were anticipating today's stream. So I greatly am thankful for that and really excited myself. Guys, want to say thank you so much to everyone who has gone to the website and signed up over at davidpatrickcarey.com/register. And so if you guys are interested in becoming a website member, I've got multiple exclusive videos, both educational, spiritual, some personal stories, and others about philosophy, more academic stuff. And then I have a whole nother library just for fitness. So if that's something you guys would be interested in, please consider going over to the website and becoming a website member. It's $5 a month. Even if you just planned on contributing through like a donation or anything like that, it would be greatly appreciated. And that $5 is one of the best ways to help me out, again, if you are interested. So thank you very much to everyone who has done that. I greatly appreciate it. Also, if you guys are interested in one-on-one sessions, I am doing, in fact, I have one lined up Wednesday morning. We're doing one-on-one sessions on any topic you guys would be interested in. You can purchase those sessions over at the website if you go into the shop, and that option is available there. So also, guys, Linktree. So all the different social media. I just created a Trovo account. I don't know if it's actually streaming there right now. It's supposed to be. It looks like it actually is working. So I got my Trovo account up now, and if you guys are interested, I'll share that link. I'm Codal over on Trovo. That's kind of the new alternative place where people are streaming, because DLive obviously isn't. They're not a bastion for free speech, if you will. Not that all of us are, but also here's my link tree for all my different social media. So whether it be Instagram or Facebook or the DLive or the website or Telegram, guys, get on Telegram. What I was going to do is potentially start sharing my show notes. So every time I go live, I have a whole thing of notes. So these are like my outlines. Sometimes they're just bullet points. They're just ideas. They're windows into further concepts. I was thinking through the recommendation of one person, I think it was Jimmy actually, said, well, why don't you, or you should share your show notes or your notes with the Telegram page, I think I'm going to start doing that. So guys, go check out that link tree and go over to the Telegram. I have my Telegram page, which is great. But then we have a great Church of the Eternal Logos Telegram group if you guys are interested. We have tons of fun over there. So really appreciate that. Oh, Trovo already censored Big Bear after like 5 streams. Oh, yikes. I'm always so late. It's like everybody started going over to Trovo, so I created an account, and now they're already doing censorship. So I don't know. Typical. But yeah. So definitely join our Telegram group. We're having a lot of fun over there. So that basically wraps up all the housekeeping and the announcements to make. Now let's get into today's topic. Now, today's topic I'm very, very excited to talk about because Taoism is a school of thought that I was very interested and enamored with really when I got out of Christianity. So as I told you guys before, sharing my own journey with you, it was the religion courses during my undergraduate studies that really opened me up to the vista of world religions. And it was the comparative world religions course, already taking a Bible course, which really shook me out of the sort of naivete I grew up in that religious or that conservative Methodist kind of context. And so once I took an academic course, really shook my faith in traditional Christianity. And so because of that, I became much more open to other ideas. Obviously, nature is a easy way, I think, for the novice, the uninformed, the uneducated to begin to enter into spirituality. It's phenomenological. It's right there. It's aesthetic. We can look at nature. It's beautiful. We can go into nature and experience it. It's lovely. We can also go into nature and experience it. It's terrifying. There is a reality to nature. And so given that most people live in a fantasy, obviously just the reality of nature itself gives it a place to occupy in one's mind as something to potentially venerate. So when I myself was shaken out of my sort of Christian naive malaise and began exploring world religions, right? Trying to find the truth, what is exactly out there. The two that really sparked an interest in my mind were Buddhism and Taoism, specifically Taoism. And so Taoism really was so interesting to me, it prompted me to even want to study Mandarin Chinese. And so again, some of you guys are aware that is taking that sort of comparative world religions course, being exposed to some of the intricacies of Taoism, or at least just the generalities of Taoism, actually, that led into further courses that I took on Chinese divination, folk religion, the history of Chinese empire, stuff like that. But during my undergraduate, I was very interested in this stuff, so I spent 2 summers in China. I focused on studying Mandarin Chinese. I was very interested in Taoism. I was competing in Taekwondo at the time, which is a Korean martial art. It's not Chinese. And so when we start looking at Kung Fu and Tai Chi, obviously Kung Fu is going to be tied with the sort of Buddhists in the Shaolin Temple and all this stuff. But if we take further and further and further historical analysis of this stuff, we'll see, like in Tai Chi, really rooted within a Taoist understanding, and then martial arts, generally speaking, in regards to these sort of rural people to defend themselves. That's what the whole Shaolin Temple was about. But we're not going to get too deep into martial arts. I had a really interesting conversation with Justin Stam on that if you are interested, but we're not going to be getting into martial arts. But that's what I was doing at the time that led me to do those 2 study abroad courses in China, actually interested in Taoism, wanting to go with Taoist temples, wanting to see Taoist monks, interested in Taoist philosophy, Taoist spirituality. At the time, I was really getting into psychedelics, which then Taoism opens up alchemy, the use of herbs, inebriation for the openness to spiritual revelation or insight. So Taoism, if you're spiritual but not religious, if you're non-Christian, it offers a lot to you. It offers a lot to you. An idea of heaven and hell, or at least heaven, right? You're not going to get that within a Buddhist context, the same framework, the same cosmological framework as you'll get in Taoism. And so Taoism, interestingly, as we will see, connects in a multitude of ways with our own Christian framework, our own Christian paradigm, and our own Christian theology. Now, the things that I'm going to be highlighting throughout today's video is where I think Christianity actually aids and develops where Taoism ends. Because again, Laozi, the Tao Te Ching, Taoism, we're talking 4th century BC. We're talking 400, 500 years before Christ. But what Christianity does in our revelatory understanding of the Logos, as opposed to their sort of naturalistic observation of nature and energy. And so we will be getting into the energies, because one of the interesting things, again, we are approaching this entirely from an Eastern Orthodox Christian understanding. So divorce any, we're not coming from a Protestant or a general Christian or we're coming from an Eastern Orthodox perspective. And so when we look at ideas of illumination, when we look at, then again, we have the Hesychast tradition. When we look at ideas of deification, the immortality, the yearnings for immortality within Taoism, we can begin to connect these with more specific aspects of Orthodox theology. And so the first thing that I'm going to be reiterating over and over again is how the revelation of who the Logos is in the Gospel of John, the Orthodox theological understanding, gives personhood to the Tao. And this is something that's going to be reiterated by Hieromonk Damascene. I'm not coming out of left field, but this is something that we need to keep in mind over and over and over again, is how are these things complementary? Well, in one key way is that the Logos, Jesus Christ, Orthodox theology provides a personhood to the abstractness, to the selflessness of this concept called the Tao. And so we have personhood, and personhood provides a further framework for the Tao. We have another thing that's going to be highlighted over and over again is natural theology versus Christian revelation. The yearning for immortality. This is one of the central aspects, tenets, goals, objectives of Taoism, and the Taoist monks and the Taoist elders and those who go deeper and deeper into this wisdom is they're looking for immortality. To be one with the Tao, they want to get to a place outside the movements of duality, outside the yin and yang, the movements of the male and the feminine energy. Outside, they want to be immortal. They want to be outside of time, like the Tao itself. So that connects very nicely then with the whole theology of theosis. How do we actually become immortal? Because that's exactly what we are talking about as well. And so I think another aspect of Orthodox theology that I think blends so nicely with Taoism is our understanding of energies, right? One of the focus on Taoistic medicine, if you look in traditional Chinese medicine, is the understanding of qi, is the understanding of energy, the movements of energy throughout the system. And that, again, energy was a very basic way in which people could begin to look and understand and come to know what the Tao is, right, within these traditional Chinese schools. And so energy is how we interact in a communal connection, in a communicative connection, direct personal connection with God, that we interact with God through his energies. Again, unique in world religions for this understanding. So we sit in a privileged place then to acquire this sort of energetic framework wrapped up with Taoism, Taoist medicine, and place that into a further understanding of how that would relate to direct relationships with the energies of God. Again, something that Hieromonk Damascene will highlight. We're not reading the whole book, obviously. I have a couple sections here that I really want to read to you guys. And then we're going to be reading through his chapters where he sort of blends what he calls a gospel of Laozi, or the gospel of the Tao, and basically looking at a mixture of taking translations of a gentleman that worked a lot with Father Seraphim Rose, taking the translations of this Chinese gentleman and then blending that with an Orthodox theological framework. And so then we're going to be moving through some of those chapters. Some are longer than others, so I'll skip the real long ones. But then there's a whole host of other topics that I would like to read to you guys. If we can get through. Again, I don't know how long all this will take, but we'll be here. Hearing the wordless word. Let's see. The First Orthodox Mission, although that stuff I may save because that's something you guys could look up yourself. The Birth of the Logos is one. These are separate chapters later in the book. Total Illumination, talking about Taoism and Logos and our understanding of light, the Hesychastic tradition, the process of illumination, that you're that old ancient monk moving through the thick morning fog on Wudong Mountain, Wudong Mountain, and you're looking for illumination. You're looking for that uncreated light. And so he has a discussion on total illumination that I want to get to you, talk with you guys about. There's another one that I highlighted. There's so much that I could go over. The mystery of the I am. I wanted to go. He has a discussion on the I am from a Taoist perspective, and then he has the Christ I am. And so I want to. Those are two separate chapters and separate parts of this book, but I'm going to read those together because I think again what we're talking about is the selflessness of the Dao. The Dao is the ways in which Taoism is connecting with our Orthodox Christian theology is obviously the synonymous descriptors of the Dao and the Logos. But the Dao, because it's naturalistic, begins from a sort of essentialistic, right? Personhood, operations, essence. Natural theology, Taoism, begins with the observation of nature, begins looking at it from an abstract and ambiguous way. We have revelation, we begin with personhood, so it's very interesting to see how Hieromonk Damascene begins to blend the selflessness, yet the same understanding of being itself, the I am, right? Who Christ, when he actually gives a cataphatic description of how to call him, he is the I am, right? I have a whole stream that I'd like to do. I may do that next on the I am, reading all the I ams in the Old and New Testament, because there's a whole deep philosophy just expelling the theology of being, right, within an Orthodox context. So he's going to talk a little bit about that. That's kind of where we're going to go, guys. There's so much to talk about, so much to talk about. So, it looks like somebody threw in a super chat. Oh, Lynn Benson threw in $20. Thank you so much, Lynn. Thank you very much, Lynn. Guys, I truly appreciate the super chats. Thank you very much. Feel free to ask any questions along the way if you guys want. If it's pertaining to what I'm on at that time, I could answer it while we're going live. If not, I may save it for the end like usual. But so now I want to go over a sort of intro, an overview, so when we begin to read more of this text, we can glean more of its wisdom. So what is the Dao and the Logos? This is where I think we should begin. So again, we'll have a framework and a context for everything that we read. So first thing I want to say is the Dao or Dao. So how many of you guys even know the difference between Pinyin and Wade Giles? Most people aren't going to be aware of this. So I'm a big proponent of Pinyin. And so Pinyin and Wade Giles, these are different ways in which to express Chinese characters into English phonetics. So you can read English letters, but you're pronouncing the actual character, right? So it's like, how do you take a pictorial language and present it in letters? This is then these two systems. Wade Giles is an older system, it's a Germanic system, and it's why Dao is spelt with a T. Anybody who speaks Chinese knows Chinese, that the way you actually pronounce it is if it has a D, D-A-O. And so the DAO then is the modern, if you use Pinyin, which is the way most people learn Chinese now, they use Pinyin to teach English speakers, that Dao or Taoism or the Dao, it's going to be DAO or DAOISM. The TAO, that's the older tradition. And so I wanted to highlight that because it gets confusing. You can look at Laozi, the the author of the Tao Te Ching, and you see Laozi, Lao, L-A-O, teacher, and then you see T-Z-U. Well, how do you spell the Tzu? And then you also see Z-I, Z, Laozi. And Laozi, that phrase, that name is just the teacher. And so the pinyin is way more accurate in actually saying what the character is pronounced. So I just wanted to highlight that. And so for my preference, when I talk about the Dao or Taoism, I always use a D because that's the way it's actually pronounced. So wanted to say that. So what does the Dao mean? Well, it's a word meaning the way, the path, the route, the road, or the principle, right? And so this concept has a long history. It obviously, just like the concept of logos, predates the first time it is written down in any form. But it's often it's the basis for what becomes Taoism, right? And so Laozi, we're looking at basically a 6th century BC figure there. Laozi is credited with writing the Tao Te Ching, and he said that it is not a name or a thing, talking about the Tao, but is the underlying natural order of the universe, the underlying natural order of the universe. And so Taoism is as a tradition, as a spiritual tradition, then is about emphasizing the necessity of every individual to align their living, their ethics with the harmony of the Tao. To align one's life, your ethics, your tradition, the rhythms of nature, the cycles of time. And again, you'll hear me referring back to the I Ching, the Book of Changes, a divinatory text that ancient Chinese people believed that actually told you the secrets of how time worked. Now, I'll come to that here in a second. But Taoism, then, as a spiritual tradition, is about aligning one. It's all about harmony, then. It's about, well, I wrote down a few words that try to contextualize, and frame, encapsulate what exactly Taoism is. The first one is Wu Wei, and you may have heard this before. Wu Wei is spelled W-U, Wu, and then space Wei, W-E-I, Wu Wei, and it has to do with action without intention. Action without intention. You can actually see then the concepts, if anybody's done Tai Chi or you're even familiar with the philosophy of Chinese martial arts, even be it Buddhist or Shaolin in nature, Kung Fu, any sort type of Chinese martial art, Wing Chun, for example, if those of you may be familiar with some of the Bruce Lee stuff, Ip Man, right? That may be beyond some of you guys, but the idea of action without intention is the same thing about being able to redirect energy, that the spontaneity of reality, the spontaneity of existence itself, to be then one with the Tao, which is continually moving and continually spontaneous, i.e. Heraclitus, we'll get to him here in a second, that we have to then be without intention. Be without us, because as soon as you have an intention, now that your interior state may be in opposition to the exterior state. And so are you then in line with the Tao? They would say no. And so action without intention is, it's almost like an intuitive action, if you will, is the way they think about a lot of stuff. And so related to this then is the concept of simplicity. Taoism is all about the notion of simplicity. Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. So they're not big and extravagant, complicated, convoluted theologies. If you read the Tao Te Ching, if you read Taoist wisdom, it's very clear, it's concise, it's directly to the point, and it's usually very insightful. So simplicity is a big one. Naturalness is a huge one, right? Because if you are a Taoist, how are you gleaming more knowledge? How are you coming to know more about the Tao? It is through observation of nature itself. So a focus and emphasis on naturalism is certainly true. And then you have the three treasures of Taoism, which is compassion, frugality, so being frugal, not being wasteful, right? Because the Tao isn't wasteful. Nature, when you watch nature and how it conserves energy, how it conserves and transforms energy, it is not wasteful. And so again, from the Taoist perspective, to be one with the Tao, we also need to be frugal to a degree. We cannot be wasteful. So compassion, frugality, and humility. These are considered the three treasures of Taoism. And I think from an Orthodox standpoint, we can see how these are very reminiscent of characteristics that would be elevated within our theology and our framework. Compassion, not being wasteful, right? So we don't necessarily talk about frugality necessarily, but I think that concept, that notion is certainly present with much of our theology. And then, of course, humility. And so when we look at the history of Taoism, again, it roots back between the 6th and 4th century, really. Drew naturalistic notions from the school of yin-yang. So for those of you who aren't aware, yin-yang, just terms for female, male. The yin-yang symbol highlighting the dichotomy, the dualism of reality, right? Hot, cold, on, off, black, white, male, female. And that reality itself, nature itself, is encapsulated between opposites. And that experience exists between the extremities of opposites. So this is the notion then of the Tao, but the Tao is more than the yin-yang. The Tao encapsulates both opposites. And we're going to get to even Heraclitus again in the Greek tradition, talking about the Logos being the unifier of opposites, but we see it right here in the early beginnings of Taoism itself, in the school of yin-yang. So this was one of the earlier schools within the development of Taoism. And they were very interested in synthesizing much of their worldview with the 5 elements. So in the Greek context, they had 4 elements. In the Chinese context, they had 5 elements. If you're interested in their sort of folk magic, their folk tradition. But Taoism was accompanied or related to, tangential to, a very famous text of divination called the I Ching. And as I said earlier, the I Ching, though we only have half of the I Ching now, so we can't really put it together, is a book also called the Book of Changes, it's referred to, but the I Ching is essentially a book of time, and that if the way that it is presented, if it is what they claim, is that the I Ching is the discovery of the sort of intricacies of time. Now, fast forward, and why would this still be interesting? Well, you can find somebody like a Terence McKenna, who actually developed a whole radical theory called the time wave zero theory, based on a mushroom trip that he got high on a mushroom multiple times, communed with that mushroom. He said that mushroom conveyed to him a series of hexagrams related to the I Ching, basically the second half of the I Ching that we no longer have. We have no idea where that book is. Terence McKenna claimed that a mushroom gave him the hexagrams to that other book, so then he could put it together with the I Ching and find out the full revelation of time. He called this his time wave zero theory, and for him, he thought history was going to end in 2012. So I just highlight that because for some people, the I Ching still has a very mysterious and magical aura about it. People are still trying to figure out and piece together this sort of puzzle that we only have half of, and what they believe to be a sort of understanding of time itself. So that is a very important text, and that actually, the I Ching is believed to exist or become to an existence between 1000 and basically 750 BC. So way, way before Christ, right? Basically almost a millennium before Christ. Laozi is credited with the authorship of the Tao Te Ching. So this is 4th century, I believe. I should double check that. Let's see. Um, um, yeah, so Laozi, we don't know if he could be anywhere between the 6th and the 4th century. And the same thing is true with the Tao Te Ching, but they tend to place it more towards the 4th century, but nobody knows for certain. But another important person related to Taoism, I think that a lot of people actually haven't heard of, is a gentleman named Zhuangzi. Zhuangzi. That is Zhuanj or Ang. I'm sorry, Zi Zhuangzi. And he has a lot of interesting writings, another Taoist thinker. And so obviously Laozi, the teacher, is considered to be, really the founder of this whole Taoist movement, really crystallizing these notions of the Tao that were already present and then putting that into a tradition, but also the writings of Zhuangzi. So the 4 components in the emergence of Taoism would be the philosophical Taoism, meaning the Tao Te Ching and Zhuangzi, who I just highlighted. Then the arising of the techniques for achieving ecstasy and the practices for longevity and immortality, and then exorcism. And so these 4 things are often described the 4 components of the emergence of Taoism. Now, what I find interesting about that, obviously the techniques for achieving ecstasy, is that because Taoism was so focused on natural theology, it had a wrong anthropology, even though, as Hieromonk Damascene will highlight, he did kind of recognize the fallenness of man from its original state. They also had a sense of man becoming God, or this focus on a sort of illuministic framework, right? That maybe wouldn't totally jive with our Orthodox framework. I just wanted to highlight that. It's a little bit different. But the practices for longevity and immortality, I think you can see that same yearning for everlasting life. And then I thought what's really interesting is exorcism. So Taoism, Taoist shamans, spiritual men were, if you're in a village and people were having problems with spirits, which they believed in, it was the Taoist monk, it was the Taoist priest, often the priest, who would perform exorcisms. And so exorcisms aren't unique. Some of the other, the smaller religious ideas that I think would fit within a Taoist framework that I wanted to highlight would obviously be shamanism. There's shamanistic forms of Taoism. Obviously, it's a sort of naturalistic religion. It's obviously a sort of spiritual philosophy. It's also a practice of magic and divination. It's also alchemical. Taoism is very astrological. And it's the whole basis for traditional Chinese medicine. Now, how does that relate to the Logos now? And so let me flip over and change this to the Logos. The Logos now. Okay. Oh, well, we have a few super chats that came in. John Pro sent in 20. Thank you very much, John. He said, a fascinating stream. Thank you for your diligence, brother. Well, thank you, brother. And John, thank you for your icons, man. I love your work and seeing what you're working on. Jimmy threw in $5 and said, speak some Mandarin and trigger the CCP algos, bro. 我知道一点儿中文，可是我的中文太不好了。I use Philo Beto throws in 1999 and said, I used the I Ching to find the other half of the I Ching. Thanks for all you do, DPH. Excellent, Philo. Yes, that is exactly the case. So caught up on those. But thank you so much, guys, for all the super chats and for being here today. So now we've kind of talked about the concept of the Tao and how that's rooted historically speaking, how it comes about, and so we can understand what we're about to dive into in regards to Christ the Eternal Tao. But what about the Logos? How does this connect? And so the Logos, then, obviously you guys are going to be much more familiar with. For those of you who aren't aware, I did do a series. It was actually the first thing I kind of began to try to put together on this channel, is a series on the Logos, the development of the Logos, beginning with Heraclitus. And so the Logos is an ancient Greek concept related to order, harmony, language, logic, and reason. It existed and was batted around and developed well before Heraclitus, but we tend to point to Heraclitus as the beginning because he's the first person to write about it. And so Heraclitus was a sort of he was a lone wolf. He was an oddball. He was always against the grain, and so everybody else was only interested in the oral. Heraclitus was interested in writing at a time when people degraded writing as really the lack of sort of your mnemonic ability, your ability to memorize things. So because Heraclitus so thankfully wrote things down, he is considered to be the first person to really write about this concept called the Logos. Now, the Logos was not a god. The Logos was not the second person of the Trinity. What was the Logos? Well, for Heraclitus, the Logos took on this sort of just ambiguous idea. Often when we refer to the Logos as a demiurge, that's more Plato, which is going to be about 150 years after Heraclitus. So Heraclitus, it was more just this general concept of this sort of unifier of opposites, very similar to Taoism. This, as I said, Laozi says it was the underlying natural order of the universe. Heraclitus is getting into a very similar concept because the Ursprach, the fundamental element of the universe, what the pre-Socratics were getting interested in, with Thales and Anaximenes and Heraclitus, that Heraclitus was very focused on fire. But they were trying to understand the universe from a very large perspective. How are opposites unified? And this is where they come up with the Logos. So for Heraclitus, again, the Logos is the unifier of opposites, the basis for all logical comprehensions. Your ability to look at nature itself and understand is still rooted in the Logos. So the Logos isn't just the ordering out in the world. The Logos is also the ordering inside your own psyche. And then Logos then is related to language and your ability to order things into the world. We create order through language all the time. All the time. If we didn't create order through language, just imagine order would only be able to be really exemplified by individuals through their own will, because the ability to communicate to other people to create more order wouldn't be available. So order and language is an essential concept. And this is where we're going to have a development. We're going to, because the word, right? The Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the unifier of opposites. Our Logos is going to build onto the things on Taoism or the Dao actually doesn't have. So the Dao isn't associated with language in the same way. So eventually this idea comes to Plato. Plato has the Logos as more of a demiurgic thing. It's a created sort of semi-God. It's not God, extremely ambiguous. God is just the good, and God, and God wasn't totally transcendent from creation, because within the Platonic and the Aristotelian scheme, the universe itself was eternal, right? So having that, our emphasis on, well, if you worship the universe, how did the universe come about? That question they weren't as interested in because they already assumed it to be eternal. But Plato, the Logos was a created demiurge. It was the realm of the forms, right? The Platonic forms. So the Logos was up here, right? The Logos was this sort of the realm in which all the transcendentals resided, right? The Logos was the source of logic. The Logos was the source of numbers. The Logos was the source of all form, right? The Logoi. The Logos was all these things, but there was a sort of it was sort of demoted as it went further and further down into matter, right? That it became more gross, that the Platonic dualism, the Platonic forms, the Platonic worldview, which you still see in aspects of Christianity, I'd say it's also very prominent within Protestantism, is this sort of rejecting of the physical as lesser than the spiritual, as the non-physical. And so this was essential, again, within Plato's form of the Logos, and the Logos was almost totally rooted in the transcendent, and we only saw aspects of the Logos in the physical, but it was so distant, it was so gross, it was lesser in form, right? because it had to take on matter itself, which was considered a negative. So then that moves into Aristotle. Well, does Aristotle talk about the logos? Yes, Aristotle talks about the logos, but Aristotle, because he has a very different framework than Plato. He's not working with Plato's, what we would call an a priori to a deductive form of a philosophical system. Aristotle's interested in induction to deduction, so he's interested in observing the world and coming to deductive conclusions. Aristotle's logos is much more tied to rhetoric itself. I mean, some of you who may be familiar with Aristotle's types of rhetoric, he has the ways in which you can, rhetoric, ways in which you can convince people or change their mind through logos, through reason, through logic, through truth, through ethos, through ethics, through morality, through convincing somebody of their duty, their rightful duty, or pathos, through emotion, through manipulating the emotional and more human elements of a person, right? Not the rational or the ethical, but the emotional. So for Aristotle, it's much more rhetorical, the idea of logos. He doesn't get into the same stuff as Plato and Heraclitus. Now, the Stoics begin to unify some of this stuff. So the Stoics and the Stoic tradition, of which I actually want to do a stream on the meditations with Marcus Aurelius here soon. I think that might be the next stream too. I don't know what will be the next stream. I may just read some of the meditations of Marcus Aurelius. But the Stoics believe that the universe is God. And they also believe that the logos is the same thing as basically the universe, and that there is it's all about virtue within Stoicism. And so for the Stoics, it's all about virtue. Virtue is the only good. And so how do you become virtuous? It's to live in accordance with logos. And logos is it's very abstract concept. Logos is just a term that houses all these other things: reason, logic, virtue, the good, the beautiful, right? All these things are wrapped into logos. And logos, like Taoism for the Stoics. So I think Stoicism and Taoism, very, very interesting similarities, especially even in regards to the way that they were perceiving logos and Tao. Again, depersonalized, totally divorced from an orthodox theological context. So Stoics believed that to live in accordance with logos is to live in harmony with the divine order of the universe, and that is the goal and should be the goal of every individual. So if you are, for the Stoics, now we get a new addition to this concept. To live in accordance with the logos is to live in accordance with all of creation, basically, all of the universe. And it's this real emphasis on virtue itself, very different from the emphasis of Plato, which is very different from the emphasis of Heraclitus. Now, fast forward a little bit further, that brings us to Philo of Alexandria and Middle Platonism, still developing within the Platonic system, still wrapped within a sort of Stoic framework, this very ambiguous logos, almost like, as I would think Dyer does accurately highlight, is logos is a bit too general. I'm reading Logos Rising by E. Michael Jones in my free time, and right now I'm through chapter 3. I'm in chapter 3, and at times I see what he's doing. He does use logos very often outside of the person of Christ, right? So, which I think this has been Dyer's critique, and I can see it in his book. But Philo of Alexandria and Middle Platonism is building. And this is what I want to highlight, is eventually this concept of logos once it gets to the Gospel of John, because that's going to, again, set the framework for everything we read moving forward, is that we had Heraclitus, we had Plato, we had Aristotle, then we had the Stoics, right? Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, all these different people. And then we get to Philo of Alexandria. Why is this important in regard to the concept of logos? How did Philo of Alexandria add to our notion that's important today? Well, Philo of Alexandria, an Alexandrian Jew, actually a very Hellenistic Jew. What Philo does is he takes this Greco concept of logos, being more Greek than he was Jewish was often his criticism by other Hebrews, and he looks back into the Old Testament scripture, and what does he see? He sees the logos. And so Philo of Alexandria then adds a new dimension of this Greek concept of logos. He now says, look, the Greek concept of logos is actually present within the Old Testament scriptures of the Hebrews. And so then he does a whole exegesis. This is what much of his, if you guys have Philo Alexandria, if you guys have ever read any of this stuff, he begins to see, who's the I am that Moses speaks to. He says, it's the Logos. Exactly what we as Christians would now say, obviously, but Philo's saying this as a Jew. Philo's saying this before Christ. Philo's now associating this Greek concept of Logos with the Old Testament. And then what do we get with the Gospel of John? We get the full revelation of Logos. Now, we have Neoplatonism, which actually exists a little bit later and is in competition with Christianity. Neoplatonism, you're going to get the emanationism. Neoplatonism, think of a dot with concentric circles. This is sort of their cosmology, their worldview. And so that dot in the center is God. That first circle around it is the Logos. So the Logos is the first created with the Neoplatonic worldview. So you're going to get emanationism within Neoplatonism and the focus on the one. Christianity doesn't do that. I just want to highlight how it's different. So what then do we get with the Gospel of John? This is so beautiful because what then John does, John the theologian, John of Patmos, John the beloved, right? The youngest disciple, he shows how all these things are true. Yes, Heraclitus is true. It is the unifier of opposites. It is the cosmic orderer of all things. Plato is right. It is absolutely transcendent. It is the source of all forms and all archetypes. It is the source of numbers themselves. Yes, Plato was right. That is where the Logos is. Aristotle was right. Yes, the Logos is tied to rhetoric, and Logos, in speaking in what he would consider a Logos rhetorical way, a truth-oriented way, a factual way, is the most powerful way to speak in the world. Agreed, Aristotle. The Stoics, the Logos is a universal God. The Logos is one with the universe. To be in one with the Logos is to be one with creation. The Gospel of John says all of this. And then he builds upon Philo and says, yes, Philo, the Logos is all those instances that you highlight in the Old Testament. That is the Logos. And now let me tell you how it incarnated and how it was my teacher and what it taught me. That is now the Gospel of John. So it shows how all these previous notions together is the second person of the Christian Trinity. And notice, with the second person of the Christian Trinity, we get a Logos that is the universe. We get a Logos that is the source of all order. We get a Logos that is rhetoric and is the source of language. But we also get a Logos that is a human person, and that is the real relation. And so for the Gospel of John, we get the Logos as the second person of the Trinity, the Logos as incarnated as a person. And then he connects then this whole tradition of this non-physical concept of the Logos with physicality itself as the incarnation. And so we see this full revelation then of what the Logos is. That, I think, is interesting and important. Now, I also wanted to say a quick little something about Christianity in China. Don't want to go too long into this. I made a video last year on the Jesus Sutras. I think I may do a stream here in the near future, going over this book and actually just reading the sutras. That's it. So that would be a very interesting book. But the Jesus Sutras is a book by Martin Palmer, and it's all about Christianity's journey into China during the Tang Dynasty, during the 7th century, that a Syrian missionary by the name of Alopen, L-O-P-E-N or L-O-B-E-N, I've seen it spelt both ways, the Syrian Christian missionary from the Church of the East, goes on the Silk Road. So the Church of the East, which is a Nestorian church, this is technically a heretical church. The Church of the East covered vast ground between the 4th and the 8th century, basically from the western wall of China into India all the way to Rome. Certainly Turkey, you could say the Middle East, because once you get to Byzantium, obviously you're going to have more non-heretical forms of Christianity. But the Church of the East covered parts of North Africa. I mean, it was very expansive. So it was this Christian missionary, the Syrian missionary, Alopin, in 635 that takes basically from Syria, travels on the Silk Road, gets all the way to the very western front of the Christian or of the Chinese Empire, which was run by the Tang Dynasty at that point, and they ruled out of a city now called Xi'an. It was called Chang'an back then, but Xi'an, or the Western City, this is where they ruled from. And so it's very interesting that Christianity in its early days actually received a very unique status amongst world religions. It was called the religion of light. The only reason I highlight this is because if you actually read this book and you're familiar with the Jesus Sutras and this, what he calls rediscovering of Taoist Christianity, what you see is that Taoism and Christianity were actually one of the few that weren't in conflict in early China. The one that actually caused much conflict were the Buddhists. The Buddhists were building massive temples with the help of slave labor. The Christians, even though they were from the Church of the East, they did not build anything with slave labor. The Church of the East, or Christians, were considered the religion of light. And it was seen totally compatible with that of Taoism, which was the ruling system of the Tang Dynasty until eventually one of the emperors dies and his wife takes over, and she's way more Buddhist than she is Taoist, and then she starts persecuting the Christians, and basically they have to leave. And that pretty much wraps up then Christianity in China until much later. So Christianity, though, occupied a very privileged position. They even fought with other Taoists, with the Tang Dynasty, against Mongols invading from the north. So very interesting read there in regards to Taoist Christianity, the Jesus Sutra, something I'll get into more into the future. But Christianity and Taoism, even historically, got along. They played well together. And as I said, the Taoist emperor of the Tang Dynasty at the time during 635 even said they gave them a pagoda and said, look, you can build what at that time was a new monastery. You can build that there. And interestingly enough, the same place that the Daqin, Daqin, which Daqin is just big. Well, really, that's just translated as like the Roman Empire. That was just the Chinese name for Rome. And so when they saw Christianity, they referred to Christianity as the Roman Empire, not necessarily in referring to what we would consider Catholicism or the Pope, but because they saw the conversion of the empire as now Christianity being the Roman religion. That's why they called it basically the Roman Empire, the Daqin. So the religion of light had a very privileged position. The emperor even gave them a whole pagoda. They had their own monastery. They were able to evangelize and convert people and educate people about Christianity. So very, very interesting stuff. And what's so interesting, I thought too, is where that pagoda is located now, and it's an historical site, but where that Daqin pagoda historically was located, just next to it is a monument venerating Laozi as the last place they saw him as he rode his donkey, his ass, west, and was never seen again. So Laozi legend has it, the way that he kind of dropped the microphone and walked off is he wrote the Tao Te Ching, right? This extremely important spiritual philosophical text in Taoism, and basically said, well, I'm done. And he got on a donkey and headed west and was never seen again. And where that monument of him last being seen heading west was very, very close to where that Christian pagoda was. So interesting tidbit. I just wanted to throw that in there. Again, whatever. So now we're just going to be doing a bunch of reading moving forward. So the rest of today's stream is just reading. And so what I wanted to begin with is the Dao and the Logos. The Dao and the Logos. Okay, well, here's another thing. It says Laozi was riding a water buffalo. So different legends have him writing different things. But again, it was highlighting that after he wrote the Tao Te Ching in his old age, he just basically got on a beast and walked off. So anyways, the Dao and Logos. Christ the Eternal Tao was inspired by the life of the Chinese scholar Hieromonk Seraphim Rose, then known as Eugene Rose, and by his teacher, the philosopher Jiming Qian. In Jiming's transmission of the ancient Chinese tradition, one is struck by how closely it resembles the ancient Greek tradition. And Jiming, in fact, taught that the early Chinese and Greek philosophers were basically alike in their view of the universe. Quote, in the history of ancient China, unquote, Father Seraphim said, quote, there are moments when it is absolutely incredible how the same thing happened in Chinese life as happened in the West, even though there was no outward connection between the two civilizations. The first of the Greek philosophers, Thales, and so forth, lived about the 6th century BC. Just about that time, Confucius was in China and Buddha was in India. It is though there really was a, quote, spirit of the times, unquote. Heraclitus, born in the middle of the 6th century BC, was one of the first Greek philosophers. For the riddling character of his writings, he was surnamed the Obscure, even in antiquity. He based his philosophy on the, quote, logos, a word which itself means word, but which bears the connotations of measure, proportion, and pattern. The logos of Heraclitus, according to one textbook of Greek philosophy, quote, is the first principle of knowledge. Understanding of the world involves understanding of the structure or pattern of the world, a pattern concealed from the eyes of ordinary men. The logos is also the first principle of existence, that unity of the world process which sustains it as a process. This unity lies beneath the surface, for it is a unity of diverse and conflicting opposites, in whose strife the logos maintains a continual balance. I forgot that this was on the screen. You guys got to tell me when I got stuff on the screen, I forget to take off. So, the logos maintains the equilibrium of the universe at every moment, unquote. Although Heraclitus taught that all things change and nothing remains at rest, he knew the logos to be itself stable, the measure and pattern of flow. At about the same time that Heraclitus lived in Greece, there lived in China the philosopher Laozi, old master, old teacher. Laozi wrote of the same universal pattern or ordering principle that Heraclitus styled as the logos. I do not know its name, he said, but characterize it as the way, the Dao. The Dao being a symbol basic to Chinese thought as the logos was to ancient Greek thought. For Laozi, the way was precisely what its adopted name signified. In its full metaphysical sense, the way, the path, or the pattern of heaven, the course of all that things follow. The way is the uncreated cause of all things. The uncreated cause of all things. It is the way that creates, and it is the way that, quote, nourishes, develops, cares for, shelters, comforts, and protects the creation, balancing the strife of opposites by itself, not contending. Of the writings of Heraclitus, only a handful of fragments have come down to us, but from Laozi, we have a full 81 chapters of the Tao Te Ching. Of all ancient philosophers, Laozi came the closest to assimilating the essence of reality in describing the Tao or Logos. His Tao Te Ching represents the epitome of what human being can know through intuition, through the apprehension of the universal principle or pattern manifested in the created order, i.e. natural theology. 6 centuries after Heraclitus and Laozi, there lived on the Greek island of Patmos an old, white-haired hermit named John. While exiled in a cave on the island, he dedicated to his disciple what we have received from direct revelation from heaven, from divine vision, and thus spoke to the world words that it never thought to hear. In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was nothing made that was made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men, and the light shines in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. And the Logos became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. This was the very Logos of which Heraclitus had said the people
always proved to be uncomprehending. This was the very Dao that Laozi had said, quote, "No one in the world is able to understand," quote, unquote. It is without reason that sensitive Chinese translators of St. John's Gospel, knowing that Dao meant to what Logos meant to the Greeks, have rendered the first line of the Gospel of John, quote, "In the beginning was the Dao." When the Apostle John wrote his Gospel, he was no doubt aware of the common Greek philosophical symbol of the Logos, but, as can clearly be seen by comparison of that Gospel with the riddles of Heraclitus or the writings of other philosophers, when he spoke from Revelation, he was not merely borrowing an old term. Rather, he was transforming it, or sanctifying it, if you will, bringing it into the light of the fullness of mystical knowledge. When he spoke of the Logos, it was now no longer in riddles, as from one who had only glimpsed its traces in nature. For now the Logos, the creator, the sustainer, the pattern and ordering principle of nature, of the universe itself, was made flesh and dwelt among us for the only time in history. And John, his disciple, had seen him, and he had beheld his glory and heard the words which proceeded from his mouth, being offered the ultimate closeness to him who had only been dimly seen before. He had even lain on his breast, and in the greatest of mysteries had received him into himself at the Last Supper. Thus, while Laozi's Tao Te Ching represents the highest that a person can know through intuition, St. John's Gospel represents the highest that a person can know through revelation. That is, through God making himself known and experienced in the most tangible way possible. So, let me now move forward to the second portion that I wanted to read. So I hope everybody is having a good time. Please smash that like, guys, if you can. If you are new and just joined, smash that like. I would greatly appreciate it. Feel free to send in any questions or super chats or comments if you would like. We're now moving on to a section. It's still within the introduction, but it's section 3, titled Modern Syncretism versus Ancient Apologetics. Why am I including this section in today's reading? Because I think one of the obvious criticisms, and obviously Hieromonk Damascene was ready for this when he wrote this book, is a sort of syncretism that may be a sort of syncretism that may be alleged by somebody doing this, saying, "Oh, what you're doing is you're syncretizing Christianity and Taoism, and essentially demoting the status of Christianity as the one true religion. You're bringing it down to a sort of perennialism, sort of relativism." And so Hieromonk Damascene wanted to highlight that's exactly not what he's doing. What he's doing is using, as I've said over and over again in previous streams, since this concept, though he's not going to say this concept, but he's going to refer to this person, of Saint Justin Martyr, and this concept of logos spermaticos, that we as Orthodox Christians can, once we understand our theology, once we understand the concepts rooted within our worldview, look into other religious and philosophical and spiritual traditions and systems and see glimpses of the truth. We can see prophetic prefigurings of the Trinity. We can see aspects of talking about Christ before Christ, i.e. Taoism and the concept of the Logos. And so what he's doing is saying, I am not syncretizing anything. I am absolutely upholding the validity of Christianity and Orthodox theology. I'm just showing, as did many of the ancient apologists of the early church tradition, show how our tradition has what you believe to be true already present within your tradition, but we have more. And so it is not uncommon then within Christian apologetics to look at a tradition and speak to that person, do apologetics using their own vocabulary, their own system, what's familiar with them, and then showing how that's present within our system. And that's all he wants to talk about and say that he's doing. So as it reads, Modern Syncretism versus Ancient Apologetics. This book's comparison of the Tao Te Ching with Christian scriptures opens it up to the accusation of being merely another attempt at religious syncretism. A serious reading of the text, however, will bear out that this is not the case. Religious syncretism in its modern form regards all paths as possessing equal truth simultaneously, and in so doing is forced to overlook certain basic distinctions or to offer complicated explanations in order to rationalize these distinctions away. The ancient Christian teachers, on the other hand, took a more honest and discerning approach, which in the end proved to be more simple, natural, and organic. Rather than mixing all the religions together like the moderns do, the ancients understood that there was an unfolding of wisdom throughout the ages. They saw foreshadowings, glimpses, and prophecies of Christ not only among the ancient Hebrews, but also other peoples who lived before him, and they saw the writings of pre-Christian sages as a preparation for Christ, as the apogee of revelation. This is explained most clearly in the quotes by Saint Seraphim, which begins this book. Quote, if we concede that the pre-Christian philosophers did seek the truth and that they did catch glimpses of it, it only stands to reason that their teaching should bear some similarities, like a broken reflection of the moon in water, to the fullness of truth in Jesus Christ. Therefore, these similarities need not appear as a threat to Christianity. Instead, they offer one more proof of Christ as the universal capital T truth. Christ the Eternal Tao then should be seen as following not in a modern syncretic tradition, but rather in the ancient apologetic tradition. The latter began less than a century after Christ with St. Justin Martyr, St. Clement of Alexandria, and Lactantius. In speaking to the Greek polytheists of his time, St. Justin called upon the testimony of the pre-Christian Greek philosophers and poets who, like Laozi, taught that there are not many gods, but only one God, the uncreated cause and creator of the universe, omnipotent, eternal, and infinite. Each of these writers, Justin affirmed, quote, spoke well in proportion to the share he had of the Logos disseminated among people, seeing what was related to it. For all the writers were able to see the realities darkly through the sowing of the implanted Logos that was in them, unquote. Elsewhere, Justin went so far as to call the pre-Christian sages by the name of Christian. Quote, those who lived in accordance with the Logos are Christians, even though they were called godless, such as among the Greeks Socrates and Heraclitus and others like them. So also those who lived before Christ and did not live by the Logos were ungracious and enemies of Christ and murderers of those who lived by the Logos. But those who lived by the Logos and those who so live now are Christians, fearless and unperturbed. In the generations immediately after, St. Justin, St. Clement, and Lactantius continued in this tradition by pointing to ancient writers who believed in one God. Among the philosophers they cite is Hermes Trismegistus, who, like Laozi, says that the Creator is, quote, one, existent, and without a name, unquote. The Greeks, says Lactantius, quote, speak of God as the Logos, for Logos signifies both speech and reason, inasmuch he is both the voice and the wisdom of God. And of this divine speech, not even the philosophers were ignorant, since Zeno represents the Logos as the arranger of the established order of things and the framer of the universe, whom he calls fate, and the necessity of things and God in the soul of Jupiter, in accordance with the custom, indeed, by which they are wont to regard Jupiter as God. But the words are no obstacle, since the sentiment is in agreement with truth. Justin and Lactantius praised Socrates because, again, like Laozi, he refrained from setting forth precise, defined teachings about those things which had not been shown to him through divine revelation. In the spirit of Laozi, Socrates had said, quote, it is neither easy to find the Father, the maker of all, nor having found him is it possible to declare him to all, unquote. They also extolled Socrates for not paying homage to the false gods whom the state recognized and all the people worshipped, and for even being killed for this. This was because, writes Justin, quote, Christ was partially known even by Socrates, for he was in and is the Logos, who is in every person. Over and above the sayings of the philosophers and the sayings of the 10 virgin prophetesses known as Sibyllis, were cited by ancient Christian writers as pointing to the belief in one invisible God and offering clear prophecies on the coming of Christ. Virgil, who died 19 years before the birth of Christ, used the prophecies of the Sibyl of Cumae to predict in his fourth Eclogue that the Messiah would, quote, come down from heaven, unquote, and be born as an infant from a virgin and bring in an age which, quote, all saints of our past wickedness would be cleansed, unquote, and that all this would take place during the reign of Virgil's friend, the consul Pollio. This indeed occurred. In quoting from sages who lived before Christ, Justin, Clement, and Lactantius corrected their mistakes, which they attributed to the times in which these sages lived. Quote, whatever either lawgivers or philosophers uttered well, unquote, says Justin, they elaborated by finding and contemplating some part of the Logos. But since they did not know the whole of the Logos, which is Jesus Christ, they often contradicted themselves. That is no joke at all. And Lactantius writes, quote, people of the highest genius touched upon the truth and almost grasped it, had not custom, infatuated by false opinions, carried them back, unquote. At the same time, both Justin and Lactantius embraced the truths uttered by the ancient sages of their own. Quote, whatever things were truly said among people, Justin affirms, belongs to us Christians. Neither Justin, Clement, or Lactantius could have heard of Laozi. From what has been said above, however, there can be no doubt that they lived in China rather than in Greek if they had lived in China rather than in Greek in the Roman world, they would have brought forth Laozi as a pre-Christian witness of Christ the Logos. In ancient Greek and Romanian Orthodox monasteries and churches today, one finds wall paintings of the ancient Greek philosophers, who are thus honored as seekers of truth before the coming of Christ. Even the staunchest Christians in Greece refer to Socrates as, quote, the apostle to the pagans, unquote. The best-loved Greek saint of our own century, Saint Nectarios of Panopolis, said that Socrates and, quote, divine Plato, unquote, were at times, quote, inspired by God, unquote. If the Greek philosophers can be honored in this way, cannot also Laozi, who came even closer than they to describing the Logos, the Dao, before he was made flesh and dwelt among us? And so that then takes us into what we're going to call the Gospel according to Laozi. And so let me put that on the screen. The Gospel according to Laozi. There we go. And so this is what we're getting ready to read. He has a section called the Gospel according to Laozi. And so like I said, this is a generous translation. So they're using the translation by Jiming Xian, the teacher of Father Seraphim Rose. So they're using his translation of the Tao Te Ching, and they're adding the sort of Gospel of John to this and showing how it overlaps. So they do take a liberalness in the way that they translate the words, but you're going to see as I read through these chapters the incredible way in which the Taoist chapters of the Tao Te Ching match so nicely onto our notion of the Logos. So here we go. This is chapter 1. This is the Gospel according to Laozi, and it reads, before light was made, there was the primal light that was not made, the primal essence, dwelling in the darkness of incomprehensibility. Of this the ancient prophet spoke, saying, he made darkness his secret place, the formless and immaterial place of knowledge, whether our understanding or concept gain no admittance. And the ancient sage spoke too of this, calling it, quote, the darkness within darkness, the gate to all mystery. There is no name whereby the primal essence can be named, neither in this age nor in the age to come. We call him essence, For he is a sea of essence, interdeterminate and without bounds, spreading far and wide beyond all notion of time or nature. He is wholly essence and solely essence, yet he is above essence, because he is not the essence of anything that is. We call him being. For before all else was, he is. Now catch that there. So before all else was, he is. That's a breakdown in the sort of temporal use of time, right? So he is in a context of past tense is showing his eternality. That's what's trying to be highlighted there. Yet he is above being, above all existing things, even above existence itself. We call him the One, for he alone is wholly simple and without parts. Big, right? God is without parts. Yet he transcends the antinomy of the one and the many, being not limited to any concepts, even the concept of the one. He is neither one nor unity, neither many nor multiplicity. Love it, love it, love it. Finally, we call him mind or thought, for he is himself mind by essence, wholly mind and solely mind. Yet he is entirely above mind and thought too, for every thought expresses a duality, the relationship of the thinker and the object thought of. Neither of these two can return to complete simplicity in itself, for the thinker has need of the object, and the object has need of the thinker. But the primal essence is neither of these who think nor what is thought of, for he is beyond them, unlimited, self-existing, free and simple, standing in need of nothing. I loved that part, though, that he is the primal essence, is neither those who think nor what is thought of, highlighting that you literally cannot think of God, right? We use cataphatic terms. God is love, God is unity, God is three, God is all this stuff. But ultimately, when it comes down to this, God can't be thought of. And I love that Laozi is highlighting that there. To convince or be convinced is proper to the nature of things, secondary to the primal essence. Thus, the essence that can be conceived of as essence is not the primal essence. Exactly. God's beyond conception. Thus, the essence that can be conceived of as essence is not the primal essence. The being that can be limited to existence is not the primal being. The one that can be limited to the concept of oneness is not the primal unity. And the mind that can be thought of is not the primal mind. The one who still in some way possesses any thought has not yet left duality and arrived. But the one who has completely abandoned it has arrived in some fashion at the primal mind, through having supremely relinquished the power of thinking. That was chapter 1. Here's another one. We have another super chat from a Russian gentleman, Velikowitz. I'm not sure how I pronounce your first name, but he threw in $4.99. Thank you very much, brother. He says, "What are your thoughts about perennialism when viewed?" I'll come back to that. I'll come back to that super chat later. So chapter 2 reads, "As our mind utters from itself a word, so did the primal mind utter the primal word, the Logos. The primal mind essence is a womb. The primal mind essence is a father. Out of this womb of the mind, the word was begotten outside time. Of this birth the ancient prophet spoke, speaking as the father mind. From the womb, that is, from my essence, before the morning star have I begotten you. And of this birth the ancient sage also spoke, saying, something mysteriously formed, born before heaven and earth, tranquil, boundless, dependent on nothing, and changing not. Mind does not exist without word, nor word without mind. A thought of the mind is a word hidden within. A word is a thought which has come without." I love that. A word is a thought that has come without. Beautiful. Thought is transformed into word, and word transmit thought to the hearers. Mind coming from itself is thus the father of the word, and the word is the son of the mind. Before the mind, the word was impossible, and the word does not come from anywhere outside, but rather from the mind itself. Thus also the Father, the all-embracing mind, the thought above and beyond thoughts, has a Son begotten of his essence, the Word above and beyond words. Please smash that like, guys. If you have just came and you're joining us, we are moving through the Gospel according to Laozi. So we are looking at a Logos-infused Dao De Jing right now. And we're reading chapter 3 from Christ the Eternal Tao, and it says, as our actions proceed from our mind, so does the primal action proceed from the primal mind. As the primal word is like a sound, a still sound, so is the primal action like a breath, a still breath. And as a breath rests in a word that is uttered, so does the primal breast rest in the primal word. In you there is breath, material and impersonal, diffusing itself while sustaining your separate and distinct life. In the primal essence as life itself, there is also breath, but a breath that is purely spiritual and personal, not diffusing itself, but sustaining the life of everything without distinction. The breath of the primal mind is like a wind. A wind blows where it wills. You hear its sound, but cannot tell whence it comes or whither it goes. So is the breath of who, capital Who, so God, rests in the Word. And so are those beings who rest in the breath of heaven. That would seem like the Spirit, if you ask me. But let's see. Moving forward. I don't want to read every chapter. We'll be here literally all day. I just want to read this section. So this first section of chapters is called In the Beginning Was the Way. And so let me grab another chapter here we can read and then move on to the next section. So here's chapter 6, and it reads, the word is begotten of the mind. The breath proceeds from the mind. Yet there was never a time when the mind existed without the word and breath. They dwelt in the darkness that was before darkness, outside time. Yet they made all things within time. For time and darkness came into being only when movement and light were made. By thinking which is beyond thought, the primal essence creates. The word brings forth and fulfills the command of the mind. The action breath accomplishes and perfects. And with these two hands of the mind, thought becomes deed. So the next section is calling of the way. So that was the beginning of the way. So it obviously was talking about the Logos before incarnating, right? Well, now this one's called the coming of the way. And so here's chapter 10. Before the Word came into the world, the sages sought him out in every place. They sought him not, but sensed his presence everywhere. They found him in living beings, in mountain crags, flowing streams, in seas and winds. But he was not these things, but he spoke in these things, guiding them. All things followed his course. Therefore the sages called him also by his other name, the way, the Dao, the course that all things are to follow. The trees, the birds, the rivers, and the winds, these had no choice but to follow the Dao. Man alone is given choice. Man alone can follow or go his own way. If he follows the way, he will suffer with pain. If he follows the way, he will suffer with the pain of the world. But if he will find the original harmony, the Tao, if he follows his own way, I'm sorry, that sentence is broken. What it should say. If he follows the way, he will suffer with pain of the world, but he will find the original harmony. If he follows his own way, he will suffer only with himself, and within him will be all chaos. So I thought that was a good one. Here is another one. This is chapter 13, again in the coming of the way. And finding the traces of the way in nature, the sage found the simple nature from which man had departed. Return to the babe, he said. Return to the state of the uncarved block, of the pristine simplicity, the primitive origin of man. Here indeed is the main thread of the way. In his infancy, his primitive origin, mankind had been made to rejoice in the way, the Dao, his source, to abide in him, to cleave to him and never depart, made to rise himself above the things of the senses, above every bodily appearance, to become selfless like the Dao, to go beyond himself in selfless love, to contemplate the Dao, the way extending into the universe, to know the inner essence of created things, and moving even beyond these, to behold the primal word, seeing in him, in purity and stillness of thought, the image of the primal mind. Such was man's original nature, the state of the uncarved block, the pristine simplicity, in which the simple and undivided way had made him, in which he was ever to remain, but from which he had departed. For not striving to go back himself, he preferred to seek things nearer to himself, the body and its senses, removing himself from the invisible way, from the way of the Tao. He began to regard his own visible self. Therefore the ancient sage, seeking to return to his original nature, to the immaterial source beyond the realm of sense, said, quote, "One's perfect virtue lies in his conformity to the way. The way may be styled the form of the formless, the image of the imageless. Go out to meet it, and you will discover no beginning. Follow after, and you will discover no end. Lay hold of this ancient doctrine and apply it to the nourishment of your soul. You will then understand the primitive origin of man, the main thread of the way." I thought that was a good one. I like that. Here is another one. Chapter 14. "When my contemplation is complete," said the ancient sage, "and my quiescence is maintained unalloyed, although the various forms are restless, I am looking for the return to nature. Before the way came into the world, the restless world groaned for his coming. For the one being who had been given the choice of whether to follow the way had departed from the way, disturbing the original harmony. The one governance over all of nature had departed from his own governor and from nature, disturbing the original hierarchy. Made to find pleasure in the way, he had instead found pleasure through his senses. Made to desire the way, he had instead desired created things. Made to remain in primal simplicity, he had fragmented himself into many parts. Going against his primitive origin, ancient man had entered into contention against himself, contending with himself and others for the objects of desire. He had spread contention throughout the earth, having corrupted his own nature. He had brought all nature into corruption with him. Therefore did the various forms that were made groan for their Maker, to restore the lost to the one way, to return him to his true nature, to cleanse the filth of his corruption, and thus again regain the original harmony. Though the various forms are restless, I am looking for the return to nature. Do you hear the restless earth, its groaning, O ancient man, O lost one? It is not the wind, for all things are still. The lake is calm, the leaves do not rustle on the trees, and yet the spirit hears that cry, that never-ceasing moan that existed before your kingdoms. You covered the earth with your kingdoms, in order to stifle that cry, but it would not be smothered under stones. Your mind speaks incessantly with the voice of desire in order to drown out that cry, but the heart hears it beneath the mind's din. To the ears it is a silent moan. To the spirit is louder than the mightiest tempest that the elements can make. Will he come then? He will come. How will he come? It is a man who disturbed the great harmony. Therefore, as a man, he will come to restore it. Whither will he come? The way always seeks the lowest place. And so that was the end of chapter 14. I love that one. I thought that was a good one too. Here's a short one, chapter 16. Water, said the ancient sage, quote, greatly benefits all things but does not compete with them. It dwells in lowly places that all disdain, and so it is like the way. The way came and emptied himself in a lowly cave, not amidst human dwellings, but in the home of a lowly animal, or a home of lowly animals, born on a lowly bed, dirty straw strewn on the ground. Happy, prosperous people slept in soft beds in the nearby inn, but while other infants wept that night, he was silent, and the sheep bleated like rippling water. Here is chapter 17. We'll read this one, then head to the next section. Chapter 17, this is the coming of the way section, reads, the way continuously creates, said the ancient sage, and the power of the way nourishes and sorry, my phone's going off. Okay. And the power of the way nourishes, enlarges, feeds, completes, matures, cherishes, and broods over all things. The way creates, but does not demand for itself. It acts, but it is not boastful. It controls, but not with compulsion. This may be called the mystery of the power of the way. The 10,000 things all honor the way and respect its power, but without demand or orders. When the way came to earth, quietly undertook the cloak of flesh. He did not demand respect, nor was he wont to reveal who his true name, a name worthy of all honor. He left it with those whom he had made to utter his name. Word of the mind, Son of the Father, Son of the living God, hiding his glory in the deep pools of the valley. He called himself, rather, quote, the least in the kingdom of heaven, unquote, and, quote, the Son of Man, unquote. For he had made himself the Son, the offspring of his own offspring, lowering himself beneath man who had falsely exalted himself. Thus, he to whom the 10,000 things give honor and respect, give honor to his one disobedient child, man, as a child gives honor to his parent. Wow, I loved that part where he talked about lowering himself beneath the man who falsely exalted himself, right? So the God of creation becomes lowlier than that which he created to redeem the fallenness of that creation. Beautiful. Okay, next section is the opening of the way. We'll read a few chapters in this section. This one comes to us from chapter 19. Again, this is in the opening of the way, a new theme section. For 30 years of his life on earth, the word was silent before the people. For 50 centuries, the world had waited for the word, that is, its maker. For 50 centuries, the world waited for the word that its maker would speak. And finally, with the people before him on a sloping meadow overlooking a lake, the word spoke his word. The way revealed his way. And he who had taken the lowest places spoke to his creatures of lowliness, saying, quote, "Blessed are the meek, the poor in spirit. Blessed are you who weep now." He who had come not seeking praise said, quote, "Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you." These were the first words that the Word spoke to mankind. Being meek, being himself reviled, and weeping with those who wept. All right. Here's a good one. Chapter 21. The ancient sage, follower of the way, said, quote, "The sage acts without boasting, completes his work without seeking merit, because he lays claim to no credit. The credit cannot be taken from him. He wants only things that are unwanted. He restores the 10,000 things to their own nature. When the way became flesh, he came to the unwanted among people. He came not to the good, but to the bad. He came not to the right, but to the wrong. He came not to the beautiful, but to the ugly. He came not to the healthy, but to the sick. He came not to the rich, but to the poor. Therefore the good, the righteous, the beautiful, the healthy, and the rich railed at him, smote him, and cast him out as evil. For he was a reproach to these seeming goodness, turning it on its head. Only he was good, who reached down to the evil, in order to raise them to the true goodness of their original nature. Only he was worthy of glory. He sought no credit for himself, saying, quote, "Why do you call me good? There is none good save one," unquote. That is his Father, the mind, who existed with him from pre-eternity. The good, the righteous, the beautiful, and the rich heard not the word, the Logos. For to them the Logos was not spoken. To the poor the word was spoken. And when they heard it, their hearts burned within them. For the Maker of the universe spoke as one who was poor like them. And they said, quote, "No man ever spoke like this man," unquote. That was good. I love that. Here's chapter 22. He was condemned as a friend of harlots, and the harlots became virgins. He was condemned as a friend of thieves, and the thieves restored their stolen goods fourfold. He was condemned as a friend of poor fishermen, and the poor fishermen caught the universe in their nets. He was condemned as a friend of outcasts, and the outcast inherited his kingdom. He was condemned, and they were created anew. He wept over what his creation had made of itself, and by his tears was it remade, restored to its true nature, its primitive origin. The first creation was the dust of the ground, the second, the water of the Spirit. Man. Okay. I'm going to move to chapter 24. Check out chapter 24. It says, "Go out and meet the way, said the ancient sage, and you will discover no beginning. Follow after, and you will find no end. The way, the Dao, dwells outside time. Yet he who made up time took up his abode within time, in a single material body, in a single time and place. Likewise, the way has no beginning or end. Yet he who made time, being in all things, abides in both the beginning and the end of time. For he said, quote, I am the beginning and the ending, the Alpha and the Omega. At the beginning, says the way, I knew you when you were not. And I spoke to you from the place of the end of time. From there, I can promise you, I can vow to you and never break my word. For I not only know the end, I am the end. And at the end, where I am all in all. I have made you, says the way, and I sustain your every breath. I am holding you, and you will not fall unless you depart from me. You will be held up while you hold to my words. For at the end, where I am, though heaven and earth will pass away, my words will never pass away. Okay, let's see. Let's get another one. We'll do the last chapter in this section. It's chapter 27. So we'll read this one, then we'll move on to the next section. This one reads, "The ancient sage, follower of the way, said, quote, he who takes upon himself the humiliation, the dirt of the people, is fit to be the master of the people. And the ancient prophet, foretelling of the coming of the way, said, quote, he bears our sins and is pained for us. He was wounded on account of our sins. He was bruised because of our iniquities. And by his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray, and the Lord gave him up to our sins. In his humiliation, his judgment was taken away. Therefore he shall inherit many, and he shall divide the spoils of the mighty, because his soul was delivered to death, and he was numbered among the transgressors. And he bore the sins of many, and was delivered because of their iniquities. Why did the ancients treasure the way? Asked the sage. Was it not because the seeker finds what he seeks by it? And by it the guilty are forgiven and relieved of punishment? Therefore the way is the treasure of the universe. Again the ancient sage said, quote, he who takes upon himself the sins of the world is the king of the world, unquote. And the prophet, when the way became flesh, said, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, unquote. All right, good stuff. Next section is the emptying of the way. The emptying of the way. And the first one, we'll just read the first one, chapter 28. The ancient sage, follower of the way, said, quote, he who is conscious of honor and glory, yet keeps to disgrace, resembles the valley of the world, unquote. The way entered the city, and the crowd stood on either side of the road, shouting praise. The children laid clothes and branches under the hooves of the child ass on which he rode. He was conscious of the honor and glory, yet he knew that he was going to his ultimate humiliation. That some of those who now shouted his praises would soon be shouting for his death. For he is a man of sorrows, as foretold by the ancient prophet, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Here's chapter 29. The ancient sage, follower of the way, said, he who is conscious of honor and glory, yet keeps to disgrace, returns to pristine simplicity. The way left the city and descended into the valley of the world. Ascending again to the other side of the valley, he came to a garden, like unto the primordial garden in which his love had once been betrayed. And now the duplicitous one, pretending to return his love, betrays him with a kiss. Now the duplicitous one, pretending to do him reverence, disgraces him in front of all. Love ushers in freedom, but the duplicitous one puts him in shackles. The duplicitous one delivered the simple one to death, and the simple one was brought back into the city. Before, he had entered in honor to be led to final disgrace. Now he enters in disgrace to be held, though, in final honor. He being himself the way on which he trod, the way of return to pristine simplicity. Good stuff. Here's a couple short ones we can grab because I know it's getting kind of long. Chapter 31. They could have laid hands on him before, but he passed out of their hands many times. Their hour had not yet come then, but now the hour has come. It has come, and the power of darkness. The time has been fulfilled. The work has been accomplished. And now the mind places his beloved word into the hands. The darkness has no power of itself, except it be given by the Father of the Word and his own time, that out of the most horrible event in human history, the murder of the Creator of life, might come forth the greatest event, the rising of the Destroyer of death. Chapter 32, here's another one. He became an outlaw in order to restore the law. He took the sentence of death in order to abolish the sentence of death. Those who condemned him according to the law were themselves condemned by the law. For the only law he gave was love, and that love condemned them. They were judged by love, and he who is love is therefore was judged by them as a transgressor for their transgression. All right. I'm going to move on to the next section just because we're running out of time. So I'm going to find a good one. Here's a good one in the next section. And the next section is titled The Way of Quenching Desires. The Way of Quenching Desires. And here's chapter 38 in that section. I think this is a pretty good one. The great way, said the ancient sage, is ever without desire. Desire for created things disturbs the original harmony, the primal oneness, the perfect love. Such desire drives from the two, from separation. It chases after its object. It clings to its object. It is anxious and disturbed. Desire for created things equals torment, because such desire can never be fully fulfilled. Torment begins when the primal oneness, the perfect love, is broken. Thus, said the ancient sage, embrace simplicity, lessen selfishness, diminish desire. The sage acts without desire, hence he never fails, he never loses. He who keeps to the way will not desire to be filled. When one is attached to oneself and to the senses, one strives to fill oneself through self-love and sensual pleasure. But the more one strives, the more empty one becomes. In order to become full, one must empty oneself. Thus said the ancient sage, quote, in pursuit of learning, every day something is acquired. In pursuit of the way, every day something is dropped. Losing and losing, till you come to the state of acting without selfish desire. When you act selfishly, nothing is left undone. Ever without desire, the great way empties himself into his creation. Out of love and complete self-giving, he empties himself. Yet being the unchanging cause of all things, he remains ever full. Quenching the desires for created things, followers of the way likewise empty themselves out of love and complete giving, for in emptying themselves as he does, they are ever filled with him, and they are ever full. Gosh, I really did love the part where where it says, in pursuit of learning, every day something is acquired. In pursuit of the way, every day something is dropped. Powerful. Powerful. As you guys can see, this thing is very interesting and exciting to read. I'm going to move on to the next section just based on our time constraints, because I have so many things within the actual text. I'm just reading one section in which he sort of re-articulates the Tao Te Ching within a logocentric perspective. So that's what I'm reading here. The next section gets us to the way of humility and forgiveness. And so I'll read one from this one. Here's a good one. Yeah. This one's from chapter 48, the way of humility and forgiveness, in this section. And it reads, "The way, said the ancient sage, quote, covers its cutting edge. It transcends entanglement, softens its light, merges with dust," unquote. True humility cannot be defined in words, for it is the raiment of the primal essence himself. The way of heaven clothed himself in it. Descending from his loftiness, he used it to hide his splendor, lest his creation be consumed by the fiery vision. Creation could not look directly upon his uncreated light, nor could it hear the voice of his thunders. Therefore he descended not in an earthquake, nor in a fire, nor in a terrible and mighty sound, but, as the ancient prophet, like rain upon a fleece, like raindrops falling upon the earth, softly, concealing himself in the veil of his flesh, speaking with us in the body, wrought in the womb of the maiden. Abasement, said the ancient sage, as the foundation of exaltation. Loftiness is based in lowliness. Hence the sage wears coarse garments but embraces the jewels in his bosom. Everyone who puts on the coarse garment of humility is like unto the way who puts it on before us. When, through his wearing the coarse body of our lowliness, creation beheld his loftiness, and at last received its jewel, the vision of its maker. Pretty good stuff there. Here is, I'll just skip to the next section. So the next section is titled The Way of Suffering. And here's a good one. Chapter 64. So chapter 64, this is on the way of suffering. Desire for created things, combined with the senses, becomes pleasure. The senses, stimulated by desire, take advantage of the sensible object. Sensual pleasure is the mother of division, breaking the primal oneness, the perfect love. Sensual pleasure is the mother of death, and the death of such pleasure is suffering. In desiring to escape pain, we seek refuge in sensual pleasure, calling it by the name of happiness. But in trying to blunt pain with pleasure, we but increase our pain, for pleasure and pain are intertwined. Therefore did the ancient sage cry, "O misery! Happiness lies by its side. O happiness! Misery lurks beneath it." Wherever there is pleasure, there must be pain. There must be pain. For through pain we have not chosen. The way turns us from illusory pleasure that we have chosen. Pain forces us to rise above the realm of the senses, to live according to our true nature, our original designation. There are two kinds of pain: pain of the senses, an absence of the object of the body's desire, and a pain of the soul, an absence of the object of the soul's desire. Pleasure of the senses is emptiness ever filling itself, yet remaining ever empty. Pleasure of the soul is fullness ever emptying itself, yet remaining ever full. Therefore, said the ancient sage, what is most full seems to be empty, but in its use cannot be exhausted. Dang, that is so good. I love these. Gosh. Here's in the next session, it's following the way of truth, which I like. Here's one that I really enjoyed in following the way of truth. The essence of the way, said the ancient sage, is supremely true. Within is the evidence. From the beginning until now, its name has remained, and it contains all truth. A two-faced person, one who is one thing outwardly and another inwardly. Such a one not only lies, but makes his very life a lie. Guile and duplicity sap one's power, engendering cowardice and fear. But the honest and true person, one who is the same outwardly and inwardly, remains unconfused, and thus has boldness without fear. When the way returns, he will come with boldness and with power, and there is no falsehood to be found in him. He has boldness because he is one. He has power because he is not double. He is unconquerable because he cannot be divided. His eye is single, and the light of his eye fills the whole of his body, of his unique eternal being. Holy, single, simple, and unconfused. He is therefore wholly true, and not only true, nor yet the embodiment of truth, but truth itself. For he said, I am truth. Unquote. Yeah. There's another one I liked. I think it was... The way is not found by those who seek after signs, although he may give signs. The way is not found by those who seek after wonders, though he may manifest wonders. The way is not found among those who seek after communion with spirits, although he alone is pure spirit and adored by all spirits. Those who seek after signs may behold false signs. Those who seek after wonders may be deceived by lying wonders. Those who seek after communion with spirits may come into contact with dark spirits hiding under the guise of light. The way is not found by these seekers, but by those who, whether they seek or not, are irresistibly drawn to what is wise and true, to what is simple and pure, to what is childlike, to what is lowly, and sadly, what is beautiful. I love these things. So I thought this was these were great. I'll start reading through some of the sections I wanted to talk to you guys about. So that basically concludes the gospel according to Laozi. I will go ahead and change. So we'll take that down. But we will keep moving on here. I still got a few things I'd like to read and share with you guys. I know Jay's coming on here at 8:30, and some of you guys will probably want to hop over there. So I'll try to finish up here pretty soon. This one is on the mystery of the I Am. So remember I talked about one of the ways in which Christianity complements Taoism is it gives personhood to the selfless concept of the Dao. And so This section is called Seeking the Way of Return, and it's talked about the mystery of I Am. Nevertheless, although Laozi knew the Dao to be benevolent being, the full meaning of the Dao as a personal absolute, as a being with whom one could hold person-to-person communion, remained outside the scope of his metaphysical insight. Again, such a unique revelation could not be attained even by the intuition of people in the most virtuous lives and purified minds. Rather, it had to be given, and God has providentially preparing humanity to receive it, had been unfolding the secret life of his divine being gradually at certain key moments in history, for humanity could not receive it all at once. God first revealed the fullness of his personhood to an oft oppressed nomadic people, the ancient Hebrews. He chose them for this because it was out of their race that he was to become incarnate many centuries later. The contemporary Russian mystical writer Archimandrite Sophrony writes, "The problem of the knowledge of God sends the mind searching back through the centuries for instances of God appearing to man through one or the other of the prophets. There can be no doubt that, for us, one of the most important happenings recorded in the chronicles of time was God's manifestation on Mount Sinai, where Moses received new knowledge of divine being. I am that I am, Jehovah. From that moment, vast horizons opened out before mankind, and history took a new turn. Moses possessed the supreme culture of Egypt, did not question the revelation that he was so miraculously given came from him who had indeed created the whole universe. In the name of this God, I am, he persuaded the Jewish people to follow him, invested with extraordinary power from above. He performed many miracles. To Moses belongs the undying glory of having brought mankind nearer to eternal truth. Convinced of the authenticity of his vision, he issued his injunctions as prescripts from on high. All things were effected in the name and by the name of the I Am, who had revealed himself. Mighty is the name in its strength and holiness. It is action proceeding from God. This name was the first ingress into the living eternity, the dayspring of knowledge, the unoriginate absolute as I am. Having received this new revelation of the personal absolute, Moses received into his moral body, albeit temporarily, the clothing light, unquote, that primordial man possessed. For it is recorded that, quote, the skin of Moses' face shone, unquote, such that he had to put a veil over his face when speaking to the children of Israel. This revelation of the uncreated energy of God, writes Saint Macarius of Egypt, was a prefiguring of the true glory, which would later descend upon followers of the incarnate God. So that I will accompany with the conversation on, where is it? Yeah. So I want to combine that with the Christ as the I Am. And so here we go. And so this is the section on Christ as the I Am. We just read the mystery of the I Am. And so this is from actually a totally separate section in the book. And so he appeared, he to whom the world owed its creation. The Dao, the Logos of the ancient Chinese and Greeks, had now, in a way surpassing nature, taken the form of a man. The Messiah had come, whom the ancient Hebrews had awaited to learn them into all truth. Christ's new covenant, writes Father Sophrony, quote, announces the beginning of a fresh period in the history of mankind. Now the divine sphere was reflected in the searchless grandeur of the love of humility of God, love and humility of God, our Father. With the coming of Christ, all has changed. The new revelation affected the destiny of the whole created world, unquote. When the Tao became man in Jesus Christ, he revealed himself as the very I Am who had spoken to Moses on Mount Sinai. To the Jews, he said, quote, "Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad," unquote. Uncomprehending, the people asked him, quote, "You are not 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham?" unquote. Christ said to them, "Most assuredly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." When he uttered this, the most sacred name for God in the Hebrew religion, the Jews knew exactly what he was saying. And so here's a little section I wanted to read. Let's see what time it is. I'll skip that one. Guys, you, and again, feel free. You guys can read whatever you would you'd like to read yourself. Here's one that I definitely wanted to get at. The seed of divine energy. Another thing that I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, one of the parallels or connections or congruencies or ways that I think Orthodox Christianity can complement Taoist philosophy and spiritual thought is in relationship to the energies, right? We talked about traditional Chinese medicine being rooted within Taoistic cosmology and understanding of nature, which is an emphasis on energy itself, right? Qi, energy. And so how beautiful is it then that we have a theology in which the energies, it is an energetic activity in which we actually engage with God. And so I want to read this section called The Seed of Divine Energy, again, connecting our understanding of energies and Taoism. The seed of divine energy. From the moment one is truly baptized into Christ, divine energy or grace no longer acts on one from the outside in, as it did on Moses, Laozi, and other righteous people before the coming of Christ. Now it works from the inside out. This was the experience of Christ's apostles, and it became the common inheritance of all followers of the incarnate Dao. When Christ breathed on his apostles, his resurrection, and when Christ breathed on his apostles after his resurrection and sent down the Holy Spirit upon them at Pentecost, they experienced an uncreated energy that was of a wholly different order than that of created energy, or qi, of their bodies and the universe. Subsequently, the acquisition of the uncreated energy became the overriding aim of the Christian life. What the early followers of Christ discovered was that the grace of God's Spirit was like a seed which had been implanted in their spirits at baptism. Quote, "From the instant we were baptized," unquote, says Saint Didacus of Photici, quote, "grace is hidden in the depths of the Spirit," unquote. Likewise, Saint Gregory of Sinai teaches, quote, "For when we were cleansed through baptism, we received in seed-like form the foretaste of the Spirit, and what Saint James calls the implanted Logos," unquote. Reference to James chapter 1, verse 21. Moreover, Christ's followers found they could nurture and cultivate this seed through self-denial, through the practice of virtues and good deeds done in Christ's name, and most of all, through watchfulness and spiritual prayer. In this way, the seed could grow within them, gradually developing into a great tree. According to the teachings of Saint Seraphim of Sarov, when Christ said, quote, "The kingdom of heaven is within you," unquote, he was referring precisely to the seed of the grace of the Holy Spirit implanted in the human soul. And, quote, "the kingdom of heaven," unquote, said Christ, quote, "is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in the field, which indeed is the least of all seeds, but when it grown, it is greater than the herbs, and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and lodge in its branches," unquote. Christ also said that the grace of the Spirit, quote, "is like treasure hidden in a field," unquote. In order to acquire it, one must sell all that one has, buy the field, and then patiently and diligently dig. So that moves on to here's one on the created and the uncreated. That this uncreated energy descends into the soul at baptism and transforms one, manifesting its special signs. That the seed can be buried under layers of ego and desire and then be uncovered by the spiritual labor of digging. That it can grow in one through following Christ's commandments, through partaking of his body and blood, through prayer. All this we know through personal experience. When divine energy is acquired and works from within, it transforms one's vital powers. It refines one's energies. It purifies one's spirit, burning away all the dross as with fire. But infinitely greater than this is the intimate personal union that it brings between the soul and the Creator. No human energy can do this. Only divine energy can do it, because in fact it is the Creator. This is the aim, says Elder Passius of Mount Athos, quote, to submit the mind fully to divine grace. Christ asks of us only humility. All other things will afterwards be done by divine grace, unquote. So, certainly something we can all work on, no doubt. Here's another section I wanted to read related to the Logos, and it is hearing the wordless word. We do not practice faithfulness so that we can become silent and peaceful. We do not practice watchfulness so that we can become silent and peaceful. Rather, we become silent so that we know the unpleasant truth about ourselves, and so that we hear the Dao, the Logos, speaking directly to our inward being. I love that. He does not speak in an audible voice. His voice makes no noise, even in the mind. Quote, we listen for it, says Laozi, but cannot hear it, unquote. Scripture calls his voice still and small. We cannot hear it unless we tune into it by separating from all the static noise in our heads. As we practice watchfulness and raise to the level of our spirit, the Word of God, the Logos, begins to acclimatize us to the silent voice that leads us through all the circumstances of life. It is the same voice that immortal spirits use in the dimension beyond this one, as they commune with the Word, the Logos, without words. As the 7th century visionary Saint Isaac the Syrian said, quote, silence is the mystery of the future age, while words are only implements of this world, unquote. God, I love that. Let me read that again. Think about this. Saint Isaac the Syrian said, quote, silence is the mystery of the future age, while words are only implements of this world. Everyone who is of the truth, says Christ, hears my voice. If we cannot hear that silent voice speaking to our spirit, we will never develop a relationship with him. In this regard, we would do well to recall Christ's sobering words, quote, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonderful works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who work iniquity. As the creator of the universe, the Word of God, of course, knows everything. Therefore, when he says, I never knew you, he is clearly implying more than that. In effect, he is saying, quote, you never knew me. You and I never developed a relationship because you were always listening to your own thoughts, emotions, desires, rather than to me. You did not learn to distinguish my wordless voice from all the other voices in your head. Through watchfulness, we begin to understand, even in the minute details of our daily lives, how the Word is informing, guiding, and helping us. We hear his silent voice directing us. We begin to discern his will and follow it naturally. We understand, and he knows we understand. And in that mutual recognition, we make a connection with Him. One such connection is then linked to other ones, and thus we form a relationship with a being we have never seen. Then He will not say to us, quote, I never knew you, for He did know us, and we knew Him, unquote. So I like that one. Here's one on words and prayer, and this is called Words Are Only a Support. Addressing the Creator with words is what is commonly known as prayer. However, it is important to understand that true prayer is beyond words, since ultimately God does not commune with us on the level of language. As St. Theophan the Recluse teaches, words are only used to help, support, and deepen real prayer that should be occurring on the level of the Spirit. When we pray in our own words, it is not good to make long, carefully constructed speeches, which only involve us in our logical minds and thus cause us to remain on the level of the lower soul. God has no need of such speeches, for He beholds our spirit and knows everything. Our prayers should arise spontaneously from our hearts, without thought or effort. Quote, for out of the abundance of the heart, unquote, says Christ, the mouth speaks. Do not try to use many words, unquote. St. John Climacus counsels, lest your mind become distracted by the search for words. An excessive multitude of words in prayer disperses the mind in dreams, while one word or a short sentence helps to collect the mind. St. Theophan tells us how such short prayers should be said frequently as a means of raising mind and heart to God. We should turn to God not only when we are standing at prayer, but as far as possible throughout the day. There should be an unceasing offering of ourselves to Him. Quote, to achieve this, it is necessary to begin as often as possible during the day by calling out to God from the heart in short words, according to our needs and inappropriate to the events around us. Likewise, St. Ignatius Bryanchianov writes, quote, before every undertaking, that is to say, before beginning a conversation or starting any work, we should raise our mind to God and ask Him for enlightenment and help, unquote. So, that is that one. This one is the birth of the Logos. The birth of the Logos. When man's spirit reaches the supreme point of abasement, God at last sees fit to make His dwelling place there. The Apostle Paul calls his having Christ, quote, formed in us, Galatians 4:19. Saint Nicetas calls it the birth of Christ, or the birth of the Logos within us. He writes, quote, once Christ, the bridegroom, has led the soul into the sanctuary of His hidden mysteries, He will initiate it with wisdom into the contemplation of the inner essences of created things. Then while standing outside all things, you will dwell within all things and know their origin and ends, for you will have attained a spiritual union with the Father through the Logos and will have been perfected in the Spirit. It is the Dao, the Logos, who leads us to the Father, the mind of God. Man's spirit, writes St. Nicetas, consorts with Christ the Logos, rising with Him from the earth to heaven, and reigning with Him in the kingdom of God the Father, all its desires quenched. The Tao, the Logos, comes and abides in us just as the Father's divine essence abides in Him. About His followers, Christ prayed to the Father, quote, that they may be one, even as we are one, I in them and you in me, that they may be made perfect in one. I have declared unto them your name, and will declare it, that the love with which you have loved me may be in them, and I in them, unquote. So that leads us to another one I wanted to say on total illumination. I'll read this one real quick, then we have one more, and we are done. So Again, make sure to smash that like, guys, if you haven't. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to throw in a super chat, and I'll get to the ones that we have here in just a moment. This one is called Total Illumination. When the light of the Dao, the Logos, comes upon a person, that person's spirit may not only behold it in a vision. The spirit, having completely emptied itself and forgotten itself, may be actually infused with the light. While retaining its own created light, it is filled with the uncreated light to such an extent that it in some sense actually becomes it. Saint Simeon writes of this, speaking of himself in the third person, quote, "One day, as he stood and recited, quote, 'God have mercy on me, a sinner,' uttering it with his mind rather than his mouth, suddenly a flood of divine radiance appeared from above and filled all the room. He was wholly in the presence of immaterial light and seemed to himself to have turned into actual light. This light," says Father Sophrony, "penetrates us with the power of God, and we become without beginning, not through our origin, but by the gift of grace. Life without beginning is communicated to us, and there is no limit to the outpouring of the Father's love. Man becomes identical with God, the same by content, not by primordial self-being. God will eventually be God for the reasonable being. In participating to such an extent in the light of the divinity, man himself becomes a lowercase g God, a God not by essence or nature, but by grace, by adoption. This, the state of deification or divinization, is the closest union that the Dao, the Logos, that man can attain. It is the final end of man. Deification, writes St. Maximus the Confessor, is, quote, the inhypostatic and direct illumination which has no beginning but appears in those worthy of something exceeding their comprehension. It is indeed a mystical union with God beyond mind and reason in the age when creatures will no longer know corruption. The divine essence can never be beheld, known, or directly experienced by man. What man experiences of God when he is filled with divine light is not God's essence, but his uncreated energies. Christ, the incarnate Tao, the incarnate Logos, had the divine essence within him. Thus he is God by nature. He is the Son of God by divine begetting from the Father's essence. Man, on the other hand, does not contain this essence within himself, yet he can participate in God through his energies. Hence he is a God by grace. He is a Son of God not through birth, but through adoption." I love that. And obviously I wanted that whole process of theosis, connects us with the quest for immortality, right? The immortality, the reaching of ecstasy, the elixir of life, right? Something that the Taoist immortal, the Taoist monk, the Tai Chi master on Wudong is in search for. And so we see then again a perfect fusion of Orthodox theology with our understanding of theosis, with our direct interaction with the energies of God, and how Taoism then would incorporate and understand energies, how Taoism would then incorporate and understand immortality, understand deification. I think it's so beautiful. It shows how these two traditions just fit really nicely together. So I think I'm going to conclude there. The end of today's video is going to be a recommendation for if you want to hear more about what today's topic and stream was about. If you want to read more for yourself, I recommend getting this book by Hieromonk Damascene, Christ the Eternal Tao. And so with that, I'm going to check out the super chats that we have. Looks like we got a few more while I was reading. Again, this was by Vela Kowitz, threw on $4.99. Sorry, I don't know your first name, brother. He said, "What are your thoughts about perennialism when viewed through the Orthodox framework? Prisca Theologia equals orthodoxy, and all other religions corrupted truth." Well, Velikowitz, I would say that you're on to something for sure, and so I don't think we actually disagree necessarily. Now, I would say we wouldn't say that we wouldn't use the word perennialism. Perennialism, as soon as you use that word, is going to be contentious because of, I brought this up in previous streams before, so some of you guys are going to think I'm a broken record, but it has to do with the problem of epistemology. If you're a perennialist and you're showing how all these different traditions are the same, or they're leading towards the same truth, what knowledge system, what epistemology are you using to show that? Because you're not using a shamanistic epistemology, you're not using a traditional Christian epistemology, you're not using an Islamic, you're using something else to then show all these different. So that's one of the main problems. But agreeing with you, when used from an orthodox framework, we call this logos spermatikos. This is a real Greek concept coming from Saint Justin Martyr. Logos spermatikos, meaning seeds of logos. And so agreed. We wouldn't use necessarily the Prisca Theologia because that's associated with the sort of perennialistic project of Hermeticism, which leads into the traditionalist school, René Guénon, all that stuff. Maybe you're familiar. I don't know how deep you've gone down this rabbit hole. But I get what you're saying with the Prisca Theologia, the original theology. But we would say that we have the original theology. So it's not like there's an original theology that's underneath all these different world religions, which I think you agree with. I don't think you're saying this, but I just want to highlight the difference. We're not saying there's this underlying Prisca Theologia, right? That it's beneath, and it's where Islam and Kabbalah and Neoplatonism, it's where all these things mesh beneath the surface. This is the Prisca. No, we would say Orthodox theology is the one true faith. Where seeds of Orthodox or Logos theology is present within Taoism, for example, in today's video, we would say that is a prefiguring, that is a foreshadowing, that is a true seed of Logos. So we have a single epistemology to determine whether something's right or wrong, true or false. So we don't fall victim to the same problems of the perennialist or the traditionalist school. But we would say we have a single epistemology, we have a single truth, and from that we can go and look into shamanism, and the shaman being the tribal leader focusing on healing and healing people's spiritual sicknesses and foreshadowing Christ as the ultimate shaman, right? The shaman of shamans, God incarnate. So I agree with you. I would just call that logos spermatikos. I'd say Prisca Theologia as a concept is wrapped up within Hermeticism. It's wrapped up within the perennialist yearnings. It's wrapped up then within the traditionalist school, of which we would reject all that. And so we don't even need to go down that rabbit hole. We can take those same concepts, what you're alluding to, truth being present in different world traditions, and just say if logos theology is present in different places, then it's true. Okay, I see your... Yeah. Okay. Sorry, brother. So I'm seeing your comments now. It looks like you agreed. You were talking about logos spermatikos without having that concept, and so basically that's what it is. And this is how you spell it. So logos here. Let me. Logos. There you go, brother. So I just put it in the chat. Logos spermatikos, that is the concept. That is what you're doing. He said, agree, the problems of universalism in the traditional school. Yep, exactly. So, yeah. So basically, as Orthodox, we have an out. You know that the Protestants, other people, they're gonna have a problem. Obviously, much of their traditions are already going to have heretical elements, whether they're Christology or an imbalanced Trinity or something of that nature. But we as Orthodox have an out. We can say, yeah, perennialism, the idea, the notion that there's truth in every... Yep, we already got that. It's called logos spermatikos. There it is. So we as Orthodox are in a really nice place. Yeah, no problem, brother. Thank you very much for the $4.99. I'm glad I could help in any way regarding your question. So Thomas Henderson also throws in $5. Thank you very, very much, brother. Thomas Henderson, a good ortho bro, always here in the chat during the streams. Thank you very much. He says, God bless you. Thank you for tonight's reading. Keep drawing people to the light that is, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Amen, brother. So thank you, brother, for the $5. I truly appreciate it. And I will keep doing my thing. Thank you again for the support and for being here and hitting the like button and sharing the stream and throwing in money, brother. I really, really appreciate it. Nick Offinger throws in $4.99. Nick is another good ortho bro. Let's see, it's Monday. I think he should be in Idaho then. He's probably off. Nick throws in $4 or $4.99, and he says, off topic, but do you see similarities between Meister Eckhart's philosophy and hesychasm? Is it the same? Is he a complete heretic? Well, it would definitely be different in the ways in which we would understand the energies, the illumination. So hesychasm is very different from Meister Eckhart stuff. Often who we point to kind of talk about hesychasm is Saint Simeon, the new theologian. So right here. And he was known for talking about hesychasm and trying to attain the divine light. I am not totally familiar with like the practices of Eckhart, like his mystical practices. I have read some of his more erotic. I think it was a discussion on the Song of Songs. And so it was the bridegroom whole thing, the bride and the bridegroom thing. And I read that. It wasn't my cup of tea personally, but I'd have to look more into Eckhart. My understanding of Eckhart is he was, again, many of the problems of that time. He had Neoplatonic elements. And so I think there's some interesting trends in a lot of the Catholic mystics post-schism. And I think certainly he's also one of them. So I think that hesychasm is about purification. It's about cleansing, about repenting. And then it's about sitting in silence, that whole like wordless word thing. And eventually becoming illuminated through God's grace, through God's will. I would need to check out a little bit more about Meister Eckhart's philosophy. Because the light stuff, right, it's very easy for people to talk about like the white light, God, and all that stuff. In that emphasis on oneness is going to put that framework into Neoplatonism. And so this would be, again, a critique of Meister Eckhart, is that schematic, that dot with a concentric circle, with a concentric circle, with a concentric circle, and the circles just keep going out until eventually we get to physical reality, to this world. And so it's like God, the one, is emanating all the way to physical reality. Now we're here and we can still see God's emanation, but it's pretty dilute because of the nastiness of matter. Orthodoxy is not going to have that. And so we're going to have a very different understanding. And so again, from my studies, from my understanding, the total stillness aspect. Oh, sure. Gotcha. Yeah, I think there's plenty of overlap there. Yeah. A stillness. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't know what you're getting at, brother, with between Eckhart's philosophy and hesychasm. But I'm really not an expert on Meister Eckhart. I really need to read more. I think I have one of his. I think I have a book of his. Oh, here. Here's some Meister Eckhart right here. I haven't even read this book. So maybe that's a great potential stream topic in the future. So thank you, Nick, for the question. I'm sorry, brother. I wish I could do a better job answering it. And I will specifically look more into the whole philosophy of silence and stuff like that. So sorry, brother. I appreciate it, though. Thank you very much for the $4.99. God bless you and the family. Hope everything's going good over in Idaho right now. And have a wonderful work week. I imagine you're getting ready to travel to the Bay Area. So God bless you and the fam. Ephraim throws in $9.99. Thank you so much, brother. Thank you very, very much. And he says, great stream, brother. Keep up the great work. Oh, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. I'm glad that you guys liked today's stream. He said, Nor, I watched a video by this guy, Let's Talk Religion guy on YouTube, and it was super interesting. Thanks for it. I'm going to tell Nick to send me. Okay. Yeah, just gave DPH a homework assignment. Yeah, I need to look more into that. Thank you, Nick, for the question. And yeah, feel free to shoot me that video. I'm not too familiar with it. But Ephraim, thank you so much for the $9.99, brother. Thank you, everybody who supported today's stream, who's supported in the past, who will support in the future. Thank you, Lynn Benson, for the $20. Thank you, John Pro. Thank you, Jimmy. Philo Beto. Sorry, I can't pronounce your first name, brother. But Valakowitz, Thomas Henderson, Nick, and Ephraim. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Oh, Glow in the Dark said, I like a lot of your content on Eastern or mystical type topics, but from the Eastern Orthodox perspective, I would love to see a stream on Confucianism, a topic I don't know much about. Okay, I can do one on Confucianism. Confucianism and Orthodoxy. That'd be an interesting topic to contemplate for a while. Confucianism isn't exactly a religion or a spiritual system. It's more of a way to organize society. It's about correct relationships and all this different stuff. So Confucianism's a little bit different, but it certainly would be worth talking about. So I'll keep that in mind. I'll keep that in mind for a future topic as well. But I'm scrolling through it. I don't see a whole lot of things that were directed at me or questions or anything. So I think I'm going to hop off here. Thank you guys so much again for all the love and support. Please smash that like if you guys enjoy what we're doing over here and would like to support or would like to have access to exclusive content. Go over to the website at davidpatrickcarey.com/register. Would greatly appreciate it. And if you guys would be interested in seeing my link tree, so links to all the different social media platforms I'm currently on, there is my link tree. But if you guys want to support and you appreciate what I'm doing, going to the website and becoming a website is the best way to do that. So anyways, thank you all. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful night. Happy. Have a wonderful night. Thank you, everyone, for all the love and support. Again, please smash that like. And as always, until next time,